Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the 9th Columbia Library Symposium. We have a very ambitious schedule today, so we're going to ask all the presenters to keep on their time. We're already running a few minutes behind, but hopefully we'll make up some time as we go. I'd just like to say that we have a Twitter hashtag for the event, so if you guys are tweeting, it's CULSYMP. Is the hashtag for the event for the day, so feel free to tweet as we go. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors that made the event possible: ProQuest, Elsevier, Standard & Poor's, EBSCO, Springer, and Atlas Systems. Several of the vendors have representatives here, and I'd like you to go and say hello to them if you get the chance. They'll be around during the breaks and during lunch as well. I'd also like to thank the Symposium Committee who made this event possible: Fatty Dagger, Thomas Friedman, Susan Hampson, Sean Knowlton, Vanny Nataraj, Nick Patterson, and Heesuk Shin. All of them, except Heesuk, is conferencing elsewhere today, are here, so please thank the Symposium Committee if you get the chance to meet them along the day. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Jim Neal, the Vice President for Information Services and University Librarian at Columbia University. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, and good morning. And welcome to Columbia. You know, at these types of events, it's always necessary to trot out that proverbial administrator whose job it is to welcome you and thank you and celebrate the wonderful campus. This is not, as you know, the typical condition of this campus. We are on semester break, and so most of the students and faculty have left and gone elsewhere to enjoy the spring. But we're glad that you've gathered here, and we hope that you have a very stimulating day, both in terms of the presentations and your conversations with each other. But the organizing committee for the symposium asked that I extend myself a little bit today and set a context for the discussions around the theme of the meeting, looking at the current relationships, if you will, among us as information professionals and as us academic libraries of all types from the region. And so what I thought I might productively do today in establishing that context is to outline briefly a new theory that I've been developing around where academic libraries have been and where academic libraries are going. I'm going to do this relatively thinly in an effort to try to establish a high-level array of thinking around the symposium theme. But I've chosen one of my favorite movies as a sort of metaphor for these comments. So therefore, I've titled my brief presentation as The History and Future of Academic Libraries, Part 1. So for those of you who are movie buffs, might be concerned that I'm going to start talking about nuns in bathing suits and Moses losing 5 commandments as he comes down the mountain, or Madeline Kahn ogling the attributes of Gregory Hines in Mel Brooks' History of the World, Part 1. But I've used it more as a framing exercise, and allow me to suggest some structure for thinking about where we have come from and where we are going. My theory starts by saying up until about 1950, academic libraries found themselves in what I call a period of exclusivity. By that I mean academic libraries and their host institutions, the colleges and universities they serve, were quite selective. They catered largely to the affluent. They were not dispersed around the country. They were relatively independent. And we probably could count on our hands and toes, our fingers and toes, the number of academic libraries who we would define as behaving as we would define academic libraries today. The college libraries were few in number and small. They largely focused on classical education. We did have the impact of the land-grant colleges during that period. We only, in the 1870s, see the planting of the concept of the research university and graduate education starting at Johns Hopkins, where I worked before I came to Columbia. The The library philosophy was largely one of control. The goal was not to use, but to control the collection. Faculty largely dominated and managed the libraries. Urban reference and private libraries, New York Public and others like them, were the places where people went to do research, not the academic libraries on the campuses. Very few dedicated library buildings, and only during the period of the Depression and the war do we begin to see seeds being planted that would revolutionize the way we think about and the way we actually began to advance academic libraries. So therefore, after the war, the period from 1950 to 1970, I begin to think about a new period, a period which I've called the period of popularization, where we get more of a sort of thinking of people at large, an intelligible higher education and academic library place, something which is widely known and familiar, something which is widely promoted and publicized. Well, we know there's this explosive growth in higher education after the war, soldiers coming back. We have the strategic decision in the US government to invest in higher education for R&D, for science. We have a huge explosion in interest in world collections, in global resources, and this really got translated not only into the university and college community, but it has its expression in the libraries as well. A lot more publishing because there's a lot more people doing research. Federal funding is available for library construction. We begin to see this functional organization of the libraries into that traditional technical services and public services model because of the volume and nature and specialization of the work. Special and distinctive collections are not just the province of the East Coast privates, but become more of a generalized focus of what defines an academic library. And we see early thinking, certainly at the end of this period with the founding of OCLC, of the notion of cooperative programs. So a lot is happening in terms of what's going on. The basic premise is that colleges and universities grew in number and size, and as research and scholarly communication was embedded in higher education, academic libraries also became more popularized, therefore the period of popularization. I see the period after that, the 1970 to 1990 period, as a period of discord. Lots of disharmony in the higher education and library space, lots of tension, confrontation, a real beginning to multifurcate, a lack of consistency across the community, and a very different feeling. And many of us, I would argue in this room, probably entered the library field during that period of discord in the 1970 to 1990 period. Lots of economic challenges. The growth that happened after the war, we began to see some significant pullbacks in terms of government funding, particularly. Lots of social upheaval, a lot of questioning of the relevance of higher education. Does it matter? What is the role of the university? And I was here as a student during that period and know the types of culture and chaos in some respects that was created. Librarians and staff unions became more commonplace, and the faculty status, the academic status of librarians was introduced. Lots of work became outsourced. Rather than doing cataloging all locally, we moved it out to OCLC and shared. Lots of computerization, the early introduction of online systems. We began to celebrate, in a very negative way, the serials crisis, in that the cost of materials just got totally out of hand. And we planted the seeds, in some ways, during this period for the open access movement. Standardization. As we began to work together more, we needed things like MARC and AACR2, and not enough money was coming in, so we had to begin to build fundraising and resource development capacities. So this was a period of heightened social, economic, and technological tension, and it played out clearly, I think, in our academic libraries. So what came next? I would argue the period from 1990 to 2010 was the period of decadence. We may not think of it as the period of decadence, but I would argue it was a period of a lot of self-indulgence, luxury that as we look back, we probably don't appreciate as much as we should, some decline in moral and ethical traditions, and a period of capitalism. I think it was a rampant period of capitalism, which is in some ways leading to what I see more as a period of socialism today in the higher education, in the library community. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Well, clearly this was the explosion in content. the electronic publishing revolutions and reference and journals and now books, the mass digitization of collections could enable the smallest library and the largest library in many respects to share huge collections. So lots of content. The network revolution, our ability to move that content all over the world, all over our campuses, so that explosion in communication. The platforms, the mobile technologies, the ways in which people can access and use information. I would argue it was the golden age of special collections, where organizations and individuals began to see the value and importance of making their collections, preserving them through the work of academic libraries. Open access became part of our rhetoric and our reality. We focused more on the user and on the assessment of how well we were doing in our libraries to serve those users. New thinking about preservation, particularly the critical arena, which we are still not working on substantively and effectively, of digital preservation. We took on lots of new roles. We began to question, in a very positive way, I think, our relevance, and we became very embroiled in the political process around the information policy questions that are of great interest to our users: copyright, intellectual freedom, scholarly communication, and government information, among many. So it was a period of more information to more people, in more places, in more innovative ways. And academic libraries generally had the resources to take advantage of this environment. Therefore, the period of decadence. Throughout this entire period, I think there are certain things that are sustained. What we do, what our core responsibilities have, are, and will be, I think, are pretty consistent. We choose stuff, we get stuff, we organize it so people can find stuff, we enable people to get it through our distribution systems, whether they be electronic or physical. We assist people, we interpret that information for their benefit, we guide them to the best literature which is relevant to their investigation, we integrate it into teaching, learning, and research, and we generally see our responsibility to preserve it, although I don't think we're doing a good job there. We've taken on lots of new roles in this period of decadence. We've become better consumers. We've learned how to negotiate institutionally and together for better price, better terms, better standards around the content. We've become more aggregators in bringing information into gatewayed access for our users. Many of us have become publishers. We've moved beyond what I call the madness of information literacy into a much more robust classroom role and responsibility. We've become R&D organizations, learning that we can no longer make decisions by the seat of our pants. We need data in order to make good decisions going forward. We're leveraging our assets, content, space, expertise, technology, to bring new resources into the organization. And we're learning how to be effective policy advocates. So we've got this sort of schizoid condition as we come to the period, the end of the period of decadence. We're responsible for this legacy, these historical collections that we've built over the centuries. We're an infrastructure of space, content, and expertise that we need to preserve, although reshape. We're a repository, ultimately responsible for that long-term preservation of both the analog and the digital record. We're a portal, an intelligent gateway, guiding our users where to go and where to find. We're an enterprise of innovation and hopefully more maverick approaches to how we do our work. And we are public interest. So how do we manage all of those diverse roles and responsibilities? I would argue we've got to think about this current or the next period of our development, which I call the period of polygamy or the period of kumbaya, multiple partners, a growing sense of unity and closeness. Unfortunately, I think a little bit of naive optimism, camaraderie and group activity, a sense that by working together, everything will be fine. I think it's a necessary period we have to go through, but I think that ultimately we're going to have to rethink the current period, which I see lasting up until about 2015. So if you look at the places we cooperate, library systems, local and regional cooperatives, state projects, multi-state projects, national projects, partnerships with researchers, with publishers, with technology organizations, corporate partnerships, think Google, We're reaching out more to the cultural community, particularly museums, and we're promoting more and more what I call public-private partnerships. So we are cooperating up the wazoo, and I think it is a period where we have to mature in those collaborative working relationships. We have lots of successful collaboration, lots of successful kumbaya in our licensing of electronic content, in our cooperative cataloging, our interlibrary loan document delivery systems, our advocacy on information policy questions, the use of off-site shelving facilities together, digital archiving. These are all examples where we're learning how to play much more effectively together. But ultimately, I think that will not work. We've got to move into what I call the next period, the period of parabiosis, or the period of synergy. What the heck does he mean by parabiosis? Well, it's the union of multiple organisms. It's where organisms share systems and body parts. Think of Siamese twins. I think that that's ultimately where we have to take our current thinking about collaboration, where we are, in fact, are working towards a common end. We're achieving our goals together for which the individual parts are incapable of achieving them, and where we're regenerating through a sense of human will and divine grace, if you will. This has to be a fundamental belief that by coming together and sharing in a fundamental way, standing not just next to each other, but with one another, is ultimately what this period of parabiosis or synergy means. I think the radical collaboration, which is the term I've coined, that is necessary in this forthcoming period, means that as we build together, we have to designate centers for excellence, where there has to be a checkerboard of capacity across the country in the academic library community. We all can't do it, and we know that intellectually, but we have to give that up. Where the mass production parts of our work, if we want the backroom operations, the acquisitions, cataloging, e-resource management, why does it need to be duplicated in 3,700 academic libraries around the country? As we build new infrastructures, let's stop thinking about doing it institutionally. Internet 2 was successful because we broke through that institutional thinking and created something which was of national and integrating in scope. And as we start new stuff, let's talk together about starting them together rather than building them separately, because we don't have the resources to build them separately anymore. Quality, productivity, and innovation. Those, I think, are the two key measures going forward. And as we build that synergy, I believe after 2020, we will be moving into a period of particularism. That's how I see the short-term future, where we have, in fact, distinctive and separate and exceptional academic libraries who are giving attention to depth and detail, who are specialized in an element which defines the whole, which focuses, if you will, on something particular. So we will have deep disciplinary world region specialization in a small number of libraries. We will have a deep service capacity that we will share across our community, deep technology expertise, deep processing capacity, hubs for preservation and archiving, centers for research and development, app centers, technology transfer capacities. My basic premise is, with the expansive and open availability of content and tools shared by all academic libraries, academic libraries will be increasingly defined by distinctive resources and distinctive capacities that they can provide to the whole. So, what do I think, how does this translate in terms of institutional actions as we move from polygamy to particularism? Well, we got to focus on both the campus technology infrastructure and the shared infrastructure on a national and even international scale. We're not investing enough in building that capacity. I argue we need to bring information services, if you will, the library, and academic technologies and academic computing together. They can't sit separately anymore in an academic college and university setting. We need to massively redeploy library space for academic collaborations. We cannot argue for book warehouses on our campuses, particularly in Manhattan, and we've got to think more creatively about how we can partner with the academic community in the space. It's one of our most valuable assets. We're misusing it. How do we organize systematically more usability and assessment capability? How do we avoid these sort of pockets of somebody doing on a part-time basis at one institution, how can we build a collective capacity and avoid what I also call the madness of return on investment. We need to be cautious of those slippery slopes of defining and justifying ourselves in business terms that don't make sense, in my view, in an academic setting. How do we align our resources to our uniqueness, our stewardship model? Because I argue if you really want to understand a library's strategic plan, you have to look at its budget, because its budget tells you what they really think is important and what they're spending money on. How do we build our policy advocacy and our legislative educational role? How do we create a capacity to manage new types of information? Web harvesting, for example. This has got to be integrated, I think, as a fundamental part of our collections programs. We're doing a very bad job in that area. Our faculty is looking to us to help them understand the management of their research data, how to capture it, how to curate it, how to archive it for long-term availability. How do we really creatively invest collection funds, the things that we've used to buy more stuff, and how do we redeploy some of those financial resources into discovery, access, archiving, and preservation, because those areas are largely being ignored. And how do we play a much more integral role in the research information management work of the communities that we serve. Those institutional strategies, I think, translate up into collective actions, national strategies that I think we all need to be part of as academic librarians. A national program of mass digitization of collections and mass access to those collections. We call it today the Digital Public Library of America, DPLA. It's not just a concept. It's beginning to be translated into something very real, and academic libraries, I think, need to be very much at that table. We need a national program for print preservation to dismantle the book warehouses on a lot of our campuses. We need to make a decision, particularly for the historical literature, how many copies do we need to provide effective access for the communities that we serve, who are being increasingly driven to the electronic copies of those works. Over the next 3 to 5 years, I think we need to work that out. We need a national infrastructure for digital preservation, because we are failing. And there's a new project called DEEPN, the Digital Preservation Network, that is just getting its legs to build an Internet 2 type capacity across the country to capture, curate, and permanently archive the intellectual property coming out of our colleges and universities. We need a national program of library R&D. We need, obviously, new scholarly communication business models and assessment strategies. I don't think we can justify the continuing relevance of the journal, the scholarly journal, as it exists today, and as it has existed over the last 125 years. Why? I mean, when our faculty and students want information, they're interested in the research paper. And we're developing new repository strategies to enable people to find the research paper. But for some reason, we have this urge to continue to bundle disparate pieces of research together and package them and deliver them and charge lots of money for them when they serve fundamentally an important purpose, which is quality control and peer review. But there must be other ways that we can rethink that without sustaining a packaging model that no longer works. We've got to figure out a way to connect nationally as academic libraries with South Asia and East Asia. We have some pockets of expertise that can help us do that, but we're not doing a good job. How do we rethink professional staff development and professional staff preparation? Where are the informational professionals, the librarians who are going to work in our libraries next year and over the next 25 years going to come from? Are they going to come out of the Masters of Library Science programs, or is there going to be a more diverse community of information professionals on which we're going to align? Is it time to create a library PAC, a political action committee, that can help reward legislators who really support our work? That's the hardball. That's the reality of American politics. And we can do all the education and advocacy and going into Washington and shaking hands during legislative day, but that's not going to get us the legislation that we need and want. So there's lots of things that we need to think and do on the national level. So in conclusion, given this history and given this reflection on what I think is the short-term future, I encourage our thinking at this symposium on the fundamental question of where we are going and where does our cooperation, our collaboration, our co-investment really begin to build and sustain the relevance, the impact, the value, the survival, if you will, of what we are within the broader academic and research communities. There are fundamentally two definitions of extinction. There's the terminal extinction, when a species no longer has any descendants and it disappears. And we hear a lot about that in the animal kingdom. But more importantly for me is the concept of phyletic, P-H-Y-L-E-T-I-C, extinction, where one species doesn't disappear, but it evolves into another. And very often it does that through that parabiotic reality that often exists within the animal world. I'll be interested in your views, your comments and questions as we move forward over the course of the day, whether we are facing a period of terminal extinction or a period of phyletic extinction. So on that note, thank you.
Are there any questions for Jim? I do ask if you do have a question to raise your hand, and we'll bring the microphone to you. Danny Ann Mizzi is our microphone runner this morning, so if you have a question, just raise your hand. We only have a few minutes for questions.
I'll make it quick. I'm coming across a tremendous amount of agony at my place of work, whereby I'm using a lot of devices, basically hardware devices, that are not reliable in the digital world. In other words, I'll use external hard drives, or I'll use CDs, and where is the dependability, and whether or not librarians and information professionals, especially in the academic arena, should be striving to demand standards and reliability. We did so with paper and acid-free paper, but now I'm seeing that this is a really critical issue that is plaguing us.
I agree, and because I was getting signs telling me how much time I had left, one of the items that I didn't say was I think we need a new national strategy around standards development. I was chair of the board at NISO for a number of years, the National Information Standards Organization, and kept encouraging them to begin to look at helping us to develop new standards in this arena. I don't think we can solve these types of issues at the institutional level. We've got to have not only standards, but we have to have an ability to take that content that sits on those platforms and to move it into a standardized environment where it can be constantly repurposed and advanced as the technologies move forward. I think the Digital Preservation Network, this national strategy, which will have regional hubs and regional nodes, I think is an excellent way to begin to think about that. When we've gone around Columbia, because we've been very concerned here about the research data that our faculty is producing, we've asked people, where is your research data? Oh, it's down in this drawer, or it's under that desk, or I don't know where my research data is. And so clearly it's not just a problem we own within the library, it's owned across the academic community. And I think we can provide some leadership, direction, and standards development that will help us manage that more effectively. One over here, Denny.
Can you comment upon the impact of your view of the impact of semantic technologies that can start to parse and structure information? Particularly in terms of linking together large open data sets, and how that will evolve?
I don't know how it will evolve, although I do know it's critically important as more and more content becomes available, can speak to each other, and as it becomes smarter, if I could use that term. To me, I like smarter. I understand smarter, and I don't understand semantic. So that's why I choose that term. So I think it's important that we not only develop the tools and technologies that enable information to talk to one another and be responsive to our information needs in more artificial ways, if I could use that word, that we can begin to focus our intelligence on some of the more complex issues, and the machines can take over some of the more discovery requirements that we have within the college and university community. I think so much of our mass production work let's call it acquisitions, catalog, and e-resource management. So much of our service work, the outmoded service paradigms that we sustain in a lot of our libraries, let's call them reference desks, that need to be rethought so that we can be not waiting for people to come to us because the machine is taking care, in a semantic way, a lot of that inquiry and discovery, so that we're embedded, if you will, in the classroom, in the laboratory, at the bedside, really serving in a much more integral way in the educational, scholarly, patient health work of our institutions. So I think semantic web is necessary, and it will push us out of our traditional roles and responsibilities in very positive ways. Okay, thank you very much.
I'd like to welcome the speakers from the NYU Schomburg presentation up to the podium now. I'd like to introduce Diana Lacatierne, okay, from the Schomburg Center at NYPL, Elizabeth McHenry and Jane Carr from NYU. Hi. And Mary Yearwood from NYPL. So without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to them.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm Jane Carr. I'm an advanced graduate student in the doctoral program in English at NYU. I just wanted to take a moment to thank all of you for coming and to thank Columbia so much for inviting us. Just how we thought we would do this is I'll turn it over to each of our panelists in turn. They'll introduce themselves and give a little bit of background about their involvement with the NYU Schomburg collaboration. I will also include myself in that. And then at the end, I have a few framing questions and can moderate a bit of a panel discussion among our gathered group here, and then open it up to your questions, which we're very eager to hear and to address. So thank you so much. I'll first turn things over to Diana.
Good morning, and my name is Diana Lacatierne. I'm the curator of manuscripts at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, which is part of the New York Public Library. The impetus for this NYU Schomburg collaboration, although we usually say the Schomburg NYU collaboration, came from the Mapping the Stacks project, which was initiated by Jacqueline Goldsby at the University of Chicago. And I had read about it in the literature, probably the SIA newsletter, and I was intrigued by the notion of this project. What they had done in Chicago basically was to work with several archival and institutions and some non-archival institutions, museums and companies, and used the graduate students in her department to go into those spaces and process collections. Now, what's the big deal? Universities have student archivists or student assistants, graduate students, undergraduate students that work in libraries and archives doing a variety of things. For NYPL, though, we do not have access to that pool of labor, and student assistants can only be pages. They can retrieve things, put them back, Xerox, that's it. No professional work. So when I read about this project, I immediately called Dr. Goldsby, who had been associated with the center as a scholar in residence, and asked her to come and speak to the director and I about this project to see how it could fit within our one institution and where would we get the partner from, because Chicago was not an option. So she came and she spoke with us, and it turns out that she was in the process of interviewing for a position in the Department of English at NYU. So she spoke to the then chair, Phil Harper, and he and Dr. Liz McHenry put together a project. This was in the spring when I spoke to Dr. Goldsby. By September, Dr. Harper and Dr. McHenry had put together a project, recruited students, and they started. Now, the center was not part of the training. Not completely. Dr. McHenry put it together with input from us in terms of the kinds of readings the students should do. She did not work with NYU's public history program. She did it on her own, which was rather unique. And then she worked with Fales Library to give the students a training opportunity. She recruited 6 students, which I think is phenomenal. Most of them were out of the English department, which was a concern to me because I'm biased. Most archivists come out of history, so I insisted that she at least get an history student, which she did, one. But in the end, I must tell you that the discipline made absolutely no difference at all. It's about the commitment, it's about the knowledge, it's about just doing the work. Having a particular mindset to process archival collections, which are very different, and I don't know who here is an archivist as opposed to a librarian or a faculty member who has done archival work, studies, research rather, but there is a specific, a kind of knack to it. Not everybody gets it. Clearly, I have worked with interns because all archive institutions get at least an intern a semester. And one of the things that has to happen is that the curator is the supervisor for that intern. The schools do not want staff archivists to supervise. But here I was confronted with supervising 5 people. One of the graduate students from NYU eventually went to the photo division, and Mary Yearwood would discuss that. But having 5 people to train, because it's not just supervising the work, it would be to train them, even though they came with some knowledge. But I also had a staff of 5 people. I also am the manager of the Scholars in Residence program. I also am assistant director for collections and services, so I supervise the other curators and directly supervise 2 other departments because there are no curators. So this was more than a notion for me. And what I decided to do was basically to assign the collections that I assigned. I had one of the staff archivists do that supervision, with meeting with him periodically, with them, I should say, periodically, to make sure that everybody was on track. The other 3 student interns, I supervised myself. 2 of them had had archival experience, which is why I kind of cheated and worked with that group. This group of students was an incredible experience because they basically just, that expression, picked the ball up and kept running with it or whatever. And I had very little supervision that was, kind of hard. No, what are you doing? Oh, no, you can't work that way. You have to do it like this. I didn't have to say these kinds of things to them because they basically understood what they needed to do. Let me just turn this page. Now, at this point, this dates to the fall of 2008. And the first cohort came in that 2008-2009 class year. They actually began at the center in the spring of 2009. They worked through the summer into the following fall. 2 of them moved on because they got positions elsewhere or they had to focus their time on their dissertation writing, but 3 of them actually moved on, and 1 person just left the program altogether. 2 of the archivists, student assistants, graduate students, Jane Carr and Laura Hilton, have stayed on up to this point. They are continuing to work on the second collection that they were assigned to do. But equally important, they have helped me with other kinds of work because of the experience that they bring to the project. Jane has supervised the new class that began this spring. She oriented them, basically provided the practicum for them because this class year did not have a practicum. So we decided that we would do the practicum at the Schomburg, and Jane put that together by meeting with the students and coming up with a curriculum. The second person, Laura Helton, has put together, there was a collection that we had that was almost finished with its processing, but the processor left and the collection was kind of in disarray all over the stacks on his desk, and she has worked with me, with Jane, I should say, to kind of bring that to a position where we can now assign it to the new class of student interns once they finish with their practicum. There have been challenges with this project, as with any project, and among them has been the fact that these are not employees. These are graduate students who have their own agendas, who have to deal with studying for comps, perhaps TAing, certainly going on research trips, that sort of thing. So their absence, after a while, their absence became conspicuous, and it would be very annoying for me, and I would just have to step back and remember that they were not my employees, that they had this other agenda that they had to take care of. But despite that, the work was done, as is getting done, and I'm getting good product. So I think that as a collaborative effort, this notion of repositories like the Schomburg that are not connected to universities, working with universities to get this kind of assistance is very important. I don't know how many of you know about this new thrust in archives that basically, it's called the Green-Meisner approach, which basically is telling us, archivists in the past, you all have basically treated archives as though this were your house. You have to clean up before the cleaning lady comes. You have to clean up before any guest comes, even your family. And so this whole notion of how we would approach collections where everything had to be in clean folders, every piece of paper in order. It wasn't item processing, which is another insanity that we've never done at the Schomburg. But certainly there is some care to make sure that if the folder says 1930 to 1935, you don't have 36 and 39 in there. This sort of thing. Green-Meisner is very drastic in that basically it says, just tell them correspondence is in this box. Forget the years, just say correspondence, or just say writings, or just say reports, or whatever the thing is. But there's no need to worry about what's in the folders. If the folders that come from the company or the individual are in good shape, leave them. Make sure that the title is, in fact, what's in the folder and not, you know, rats and there's cats in there, that sort of thing. But that, while we do a modification of that when we first receive a collection, the notion of treating all collections like that makes us a little crazy, and I know it makes researchers a little crazy, even though researchers say, just give it to me. I'll figure it out. You know, even if the things are laying in the folder this way and not like that, no, not gonna happen in my house, you know? At any rate, because of that, because we don't have the resources, my staff consists of 3 full-time, 3 part-time. I don't have, that's a very small staff for processing archival collections. Therefore, using student assistance in this collaborative kind of way is an incredibly good way of getting work done, satisfactory work done. And so if anybody's out there who is not a member of faculty and works in a repository, a public institution, I advocate doing this kind of thing without any hesitation. And that's my remarks.
My name is Elizabeth McHenry. I'm in the English department at NYU. Let me just start out by saying that we really were incredibly lucky with this project because we met with very few roadblocks along the way. And so it was relatively easy for us to form a functional partnership with the Schomburg. This is because from the very beginning, we really had a team effort going on. And I should say that the only reason I became involved in this was because Jackie actually did decide to come to NYU, but she decided she would not come for a full year. And we wanted to start the project sooner rather than later. And so I took over essentially for her and mounted this project for her. And I'll get to the part about why I'm still involved with it at the end. But I will say that the leadership at the Schomburg believed in this project from the very beginning, and they trusted us to train the students and also to secure the funding that would make the program possible. They also provided funding at a key moment in our planning of the program that made it clear that they were committed to the project, not just in the idea of it, but that they really wanted it to happen. And at NYU, our deans fully supported the idea from the very beginning, and they generously also provided us with funds so we could get the project off the ground. And our own library, the Bopst Library, of which the Fales and the Tamament Library are part of, their staff contributed both time and effort in helping us to determine the best ways to train our students and seeing that they missed no important steps along the way. Finally, several key members at the key departments at the university, including but not limited to the English department, supported our efforts to involve their students in this program, and individual advisors of students, instead of saying, no, definitely don't do this, it's a waste of your time, or it will take you away from your dissertation work, they saw the value of the project to their students and encouraged them to become involved. So I want to say a word about how we trained our students, since that was a piece that I was more or less responsible for, or the first year I was responsible for. We started with 6 NYU graduate students, all in PhD programs, either in English and or history. I think there were 2 history students, one of whom was less successful than the other one. The other one was remarkably capable. So 4 from English, 2 from history. And all were pursuing Africana-related studies in their fields. And they were vetted based on, obviously, their interest in the program and their overall skills, but also their positioning in their respective programs. So we did not accept first-year PhD students. We accepted students who were in their, I think, 2nd and 3rd year in the program. Most of them had not taken their exams yet, but were coming up on the point of taking their exams. So their moment in the program seemed to be important for just ensuring their success and their commitment to it. And we also insisted that they dedicate at least 1 full year to working in the Schomburg. They also, with this first group, some of them had absolutely no experience working in archives, and some of them had various levels of experience, essentially interning, and one person did have a degree in library science, which was incredibly helpful in the training mode, as well as obviously when she got to the Schomburg. We then mounted a specialized semester-long training course that was offered through the English department, for which students received credit. And the course combined essentially an intensive review of the history and the character of the Schomburg collections with hands-on processing instruction provided mostly by various librarians and archivists drawn from the Bopes Library, which again includes the Fales, which is our special collections, and the Tamament Library, which is the history of labor. Staff members from the Schomburg, namely Diana and Mary, also came downtown occasionally to talk to students about the Schomburg. And one particular session that they supervised was a sort of walkthrough of the Schomburg's finding aids in terms of their style and their logic. In fact, this training course worked beautifully that first year, thanks in part to the cooperation of this team of scholars and archivists and librarians. Marvin Taylor, who's the head of the Fales Library, gave us a relatively small collection to process. And so essentially one day he took me to their off-site storage unit, and we just looked at collections and together sort of picked one that we thought would be good for this sort of thing. It was that of an experimental theater group on the Lower East Side called Collective Unconscious. And one reason it was so good for this particular lesson was that it was a theater group that essentially had been priced out of their real estate, and so they had been kicked out of their space at the very last second, and everything was literally thrown into boxes. So it could not have been in more disarray. And the other reason why it was very interesting was at being a theater group, there were not only stacks and stacks of papers, but also props and all sorts of items that were challenging and sort of different. And so our students learned very quickly and remained under the supervision of the library staff. I will say that, that 2 things. One is that our assumption was that, that once the students had processed a small collection under pretty much direct supervision, they would almost immediately be ready to and capable of moving on to more demanding projects and tackling them nearly independently. And of course, this is a huge gamble. And as Diana said, some students clearly catch on faster than others. But this was an extraordinary group, and they caught on very quickly. The other thing I will say is that I said that the collection was a mess, but one of the most helpful aspects of the training was really our ability to work together as a group. And so certainly later on in that training component, as a group, we would be in this one room processing this collection, And not only did we talk about, what was on TV the night before, but we also talked about, where things should go and how we were doing things. And that collaborative effort, even in the training component, I think was really helpful to making them really confident when they went on independently. About 2/3 of the way through the semester, students began working for hourly pay on site at the Schomburg. And again, as Mary said, as Diana said, under the supervision of the staff there. And I should tell you that we pay them at the rate of $15 an hour. And that means for us, at NYU, we need to calculate what we call fringe. So we need to put aside essentially $20 for every $15 we pay them, more or less. And according to the terms of their fellowship, they are only allowed to work 10 hours a week during the academic year, and 15 hours. We have capped them because of our budget to 15 hours a week during the summer. And one thing you should just remember, and Diana touched on this, is that the restrictions are not only because of their fellowship support, but also because of the reality of their lives as students. And one thing we didn't want to do is derail their doctoral training because they were working at the Schomburg. So as you can imagine, they had all sorts of things. They had exams, they had vacations where they wanted to spend time with their family, they had heavy loads of work, they had final papers. And one thing I will say is that the Schomburg was incredibly flexible with making it all work out, making all the times work out and the schedules work out. I said I would talk a little more about how I fell into the role as administrator, and that is that Jackie did come to NYU, but she stayed only for one academic year and then went on. She's at Yale University now. And so the project is sort of back with me, and I'm very happy. But one thing I'll say is that I do very little as an administrator, in part because everything has gone so smoothly. I check in periodically with the Schomburg curators and staff to make sure everything's going smoothly. I check in with the students to make sure they are doing what they're supposed to be doing and keeping tabs on their project. But there's very little administrative duty because everyone knows what they're doing. We're working with grown-ups. The Schomburg staff is great about, sort of keeping up with them. But I will say that we did imagine it when we first started out that there would be a stipend for the administrator and there'd be a stipend for the people who worked to help train the students. We have never spent any money on anything but training but hourly salary for the students, in part because it just is not that, it has not been labor that seemed at any way onerous or difficult. It's been very simple, and everyone has generously supported their time in the same way, or contributed their time in the same way they would if there was a class visiting the Schomburg, or the class visiting the Fales to look at documents. So that part has been great, and one thing I will say is that we've always been under our budget because we've never spent for anything but student salary. So has this been a successful initiative for us? Yes, incredibly so. And I want to just highlight really quickly 3 ways that I think our students have benefited from this. First of all, those who have participated in the Schomburg program are really in tune with archival sources, not only as the center of the intellectual content of their work, and I'll just say that all 6 of the students who began the program are doing incredible projects, all of which are dependent on archival work, and all of which distinguish themselves really from the work of their peers because of that depth and that sort of facility in the archives. But also because essentially their archival work has become the center of their scholarly identity. And what I mean by that is that these are students who have really led us on campus to an understanding of the importance of the archives, and they've taken their work in the archives essentially a step further by being at the forefront of encouraging us as teachers and students, and really as an intellectual community, to think critically about archives, in effect both examining and contributing to a growing interdisciplinary body of work that draws on the archive as a lens for exploring questions of history, memory, evidence, representation, and canonicity. Simply put, and to the tremendous intellectual benefit of all, These students have become the leaders of conversations not only about concepts of the archive and how these concepts have been deployed across multiple academic disciplines, but also about the nature of cross-disciplinary, cross-institutional collaboration. What they recognize is that archives serve as sites where the practices of scholars, record keepers, artists, digital preservationists, and curators meet, and as an emergent field of analysis, at least for us in the departments, archival studies offers an opportunity to bring together the strengths of existing practices in the archival profession, a tradition of archival research across the humanities, and the analytical approaches of literary and cultural studies. Our students have recognized that organized efforts to bring together the scholars and students working on archives and archival projects to explicitly examine the ways in which their approaches to the archive converge and diverge remain under-realized, and that opportunities for scholars and archivists to learn from each other's practices remain too rare. They are convinced that our shared use of the term archive offers a productive opportunity to think together across analytical, institutional, and professional boundaries. And Jane will talk a little more about the kinds of things that have come out of this project, I think, for her. The second really important thing, it's no mystery that our students are facing an ongoing crisis in terms of hiring. Simply put, there are very few jobs available to freshly minted PhDs, and when jobs do become available, the competition for them is fierce. So the Schomburg interns essentially have gained a tremendous amount of experience in archival management that quite simply sets them apart. It distinguishes them, and I think the kinds of projects that have come out of their work in the archives will further distinguish them as they go on the job market. Finally, much of what goes on in the academy, and this is particularly true of doctoral programs and of doctoral study generally, goes on in isolation. One of the most important aspects of our collaboration with the Schomburg lies in the simple fact that of scholars learning early on the importance of giving service outside of their home institution and outside of their own scholarly communities. By moving outside of their local community, our students have learned lessons about professionalism, responsibility, and working as a team that we never could have imparted to them through the traditional course of study that we offer. Universities have always been and they remain relatively isolated and isolating places, and even our own special collections library, the Fales, is a library that serves, for the most part, other scholars from institutions similar to ours. Anyone who's been in the reading room of the Schomburg at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekday knows that the Schomburg is and will always be a different kind of institution, one that suggests that scholarly practice need not always be restricted to those with a PhD or take place behind closed doors. The Schomburg is used by school children and community activists as well as traditional scholars. It is a branch library that serves its neighborhood and serves as a world-renowned research library as well. It is in many ways both a throwback to the past and a model of how institutions charged with preserving artifacts of cultural heritage might operate in the future. It is good for our students, and especially for students who will become scholars and go on to shape the future of our universities and our libraries, to see and appreciate and come to value that difference. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to pick up for a moment on some of Liz's final remarks as a way of addressing the question that I wanted to bring to our comments today, which is to say how participation in this initiative has changed or shaped my graduate experience as a representative of graduate experience in this project generally, and just in terms of as I complete my degree and move forward in my profession, thinking about how the initiative impacts my scholarly methods and my teaching philosophy in particular. Just Liz's remarks about the unique nature of the Schomburg Center, both as a community institution, as a renowned repository for African American and African material culture, literary culture, and history. I think those are really important remarks to bring to bear on how being a part of this initiative has shaped my graduate experience in particular, because it makes me think about the reasons that I've, in collaboration with one of the PhD students in history who's been a part of the project, why the two of us have focused over the past couple of years on how we can bring these types of multidisciplinary conversations to NYU. In terms of thinking about how to do that, we've spent the past couple of years collaborating on a series of events and panel discussions, the first entitled Discussing the Archive in Spring 2010, and the second, From Process to Product, Working the Archive in Spring 2011, which has generated the formation of the NYU Workshop in Archival Practice, which is a student-driven forum run out of the English department whose main focus is to continue the kinds of conversations that both Liz and Diana have alluded to in terms of how this initiative has put archivists and scholars at advanced stages of their own work, such as Liz, and students like myself who are in the process of acquiring graduate training and really formulating what kinds of scholarship and work that we want to do, bringing those people into the same space to have conversations about what doing archival work is all about. In terms of my own experience, I came to NYU because I wanted to do print culture studies and be involved in history of the book scholarship, but I didn't have a really firm sense of what that means and how that would work in terms of actually getting into the archive. I was fortunate enough to have those conversations early on in my graduate training, and I was aware enough as I moved through my work with the Schomburg Project to realize that that isn't the way that things usually work in terms of how graduate students in the humanities are trained to do their own scholarship. One crucial element in terms of this project, and one of the real points of relevance I think that it has in the current state of things, as it were, in the job market for PhD students in the humanities, is thinking about time to degree. I think that the confidence and the research acumen that I've been able to develop as a participant in this project really has not only informed the relationships that I've developed with the folks here on this project, but also has really helped me hone a sense of confidence in my own abilities as a researcher, for the simple fact that very few graduate students get the opportunity to look at materials and think and imagine what it would be like to write a dissertation from those materials if those materials are in fact not your own dissertation materials. Of course, what I'm talking about is being faced with a collection to process, materials to arrange, a finding aid to create, and how best to create that narrative and arrange those materials so that a person who does, say, want to write a dissertation about the U.S. State Department and its policies toward Africa in the 1960s can immediately arrive at those materials that can help them best tell the story that they want to tell. And I would say that in terms of developing the workshop in archival practice, that has been one of the most immediate and resonant pieces of that experience for me, is being able to bring professional archivists together, bring advanced scholars together to lead workshops for graduate students that really do focus not only on the challenges and the gaps that doing work in the archive can often present to us, but also the idea of thinking collaboratively and thinking across the boundaries of professional responsibility, professional alignment, professional allegiance, to think about the stories that can emerge from these materials, how helping graduate students think of themselves as storytellers in that respect. I think that that's really important. So I would emphasize that sense of confidence, that sense of relationship building as elements of my experience as a graduate student that are directly a result of my participation in this project. One element that I wanted to touch on from Diana's mentioning of mapping the stacks that I think has been really useful is that I don't know that there's necessarily always an appropriate emphasis on documentation in institutional collaborations. I think that, in this age of blogging and Twitter and being connected via so many different forms of social media, I think that it's ever more important to to document the conversations that you're having, whether they take place through events, whether they take place through shared scraps of information. I have a newfound appreciation for just the sheer importance and generosity of the toss away email on a Thursday afternoon from a colleague or an archivist that I know saying, I saw this random piece of paper and I think that it might be really important to you. You should come look at it. And I think that type of relationship building is a really important part of this type of collaborating. And I think that for the workshop in archival practice, we've made a concerted effort to document not only the workshops that happen in person on the NYU campus, but also the ongoing conversations and collaborations that we may have with other groups. And I think that sense of confidence that I was speaking about before has really galvanized myself, galvanized my collaborator, Laura Helton, to continue having those conversations with people that we may meet as a part of those workshops that we lead. I mean, I think of the collaboration that has happened as a part of my participation as this project is an outwardly growing network where I've come into contact with people who are doing extraordinary work, and I've learned a great deal from them, and that certainly has been, again, a direct result of my participation in this group. I just also wanted to say a bit in terms of graduate training about thinking about archives and pedagogy. It was, as Diana said, quite a wonderful experience for me to help plan the training practicum for the new class of interns. I was lucky enough to be a part of the initial group at the Fales Library and Special Collections, where the truly group nature of having to process a collection that far exceeded any of the particular field expertise that any of us had, literally sitting around in a group trying to compare materials and having to make very concrete those types of communications and those types of getting used to finding random objects in boxes and having to narrate how they might relate to other objects that we found. That really unique nature of pedagogy and that sort of hands-on nature of pedagogy is something that I think gets more and more removed the further that you get into graduate work in a PhD. It is, as Liz pointed out, an increasingly isolated experience, and being a part of that first group really broke that down and in ways that were really helpful. So in terms of thinking about graduate school as a time of figuring out what kind of pedagogy I want to practice, that was very instructive in terms of having to learn something and then turn around and teach it. I think also there's a real instrumentality to that, a real usefulness to that, but it's also, it hasn't just been limited to my participation in the project, and that was one point that I wanted to make, that being a part of the Schomburg NYU collaboration has also had a real substantive impact on the type of undergraduate pedagogy that I want to practice. So in terms of the opportunities to teach that I've had while I've been a graduate student at NYU, I have made archives a part of that process in a way that I certainly would not have, I think, otherwise. I think that sense of confidence in research, confidence in handling the material, confidence in arranging the material is something that has allowed me to then turn around and invest that similar type of confidence in my undergraduate students, that they can, in fact, go to the archive, they can, in fact, work with these materials. They've worked with another archivist at the Fales Library who's in the process of building her own, taking the initiative to build her own collection around the Riot Grrrl movement of the early 1990s. And since I was teaching a class in the representations of women in US culture, that was quite on point. And so we were able to work together on a project for my students. So they're really, all of this is a way of saying I can't imagine a part of my graduate training or my scholarship moving forward that has not in some way been shaped by my work with this collaboration. And I just would like to close by saying the generosity of both my scholarly mentors and my archiving mentors in giving of their time and giving of their flexibility, certainly to have these students who are being pulled in so many different directions to come and work for them, work with them, and gather such invaluable experience is something that I will carry forward, I know, in my own scholarship. So I'll close with that, but hope that we'll address other things and questions. Thank you.
For me, the first challenge of this project was me. My time with a small staff, I know you've heard this a million times, having to supervise people, do field work, be pulled away to do exhibitions and a variety of things, I had to decide whether or not this is something I really could manage and was willing to manage. The other thing for me is this is not the normal type of intern that would come to me or that would even be interested in doing an internship in the photographs and prints division. One would think library school students, perhaps art students, the many students who want to be the next registrar of the Metropolitan Museum of Art or MoMA, who want that unique experience in handling precious materials. As a curator, I also had to be comfortable with a stranger coming into the collection, handling rare and unique materials. So I had to wrap my head around all of this. And I decided I definitely was going to take the chance. I was going to drop any assumptions, preconceived notions, and I was going to pick up this challenge. Having an intern, especially one who had not worked in a special collections unit, I had to be prepared to spend time training, first and foremost in the handling of the materials. I had to spend time not only supervising the work, and I was the only one who was actually working with the intern, but I had to train from the bottom up, basically, and not be afraid to do it. I saw this as an opportunity not to get someone to work on a collection backlog that I had sitting around that I wanted to give access to, but I also wanted her to be engaged in this process. So in addition to frequent meetings, I solicited her ideas on arranging the collection, describing the collection. I knew what I wanted. I knew the collection. I had acquired the bulk of the material. But I wanted to hear from her. I didn't want to dictate to her. And to me, that was very important because I also saw her as a researcher, as a budding scholar, and in addition to my own selfish institutional needs, I wanted to ensure that this was that she would really gain something out of this. I would not assume that because they're pretty pictures that would be enough to keep her going. So I felt this needed to truly be a learning experience for her as well. I was fortunate to have an intern, and they were all great interns, who was highly motivated, who did a lot of research on her own, even beyond the initial research and training, who was interested in the material, who gained great insight into the material. And even though she could work independently once we had discussed our arrangement scheme, I also met with her regularly. I didn't just leave her out there on her own. I wanted to solicit her thoughts at different stages of the process. She did a really fantastic job in general. The collection of postcards, of a few thousand postcards, which primarily documented the African colonial experience, she created a wonderful finding aid, which not only serves for bibliographic purposes, but it's also a tool that I could use for further collection development, as well as further research on the format into those areas that were documented, the work of those thousands of photographers, publishers, and so forth. Because I was now working exclusively with this format, it was also a learning experience for me, because I now had to begin to do some general research on my own into the format, that historical time period, the different areas. I began to research some of the photographers as well. And she created a wonderful finding aid for this collection, which we can continue to add to as we add more materials to that particular collection. I always kept in mind that she was working on her dissertation. She was completing her coursework, so I knew I would have to be flexible. As a matter of fact, during that time period, she not only completed her coursework, she had a baby. She did an internship at the Library Company of Philadelphia. And then she returned. She's back, and she is tying up the loose ends. Because after we finished the postcard collection, I assigned her to work on prints, some new prints that we had acquired on the same topic. And she committed to returning, and she is back. In one of my last meetings with her, I asked her to tell me how the experience had been in general, what she felt that she had gained from this experience. As a researcher and a budding scholar, she said that she was very pleased to have this behind-the-scenes access to the collection, to see how decisions are made by curators, archivists, librarians, catalogers, how we reach these conclusions as to how to arrange a collection or describe a collection or provide access to a collection, not only physical access, but catalog records, metadata when this material is cataloged. And she said it was very, very helpful. She said it also informed her sense of how to better do research. And it was a reminder to her that if your topic, for example, is Africa, there are related subject areas that you may not think might be able to provide more information on your research topic. And she now has that sense that beyond what seems obvious, she also needs to think differently. She needs to look at it from different perspectives, or even dig deeper. There is a lot of stuff on the internet. It is about access. Those of us in the field, well, you all know, it's easy access. It doesn't replace preservation. But for people who are able to make a trip to the institution where the originals are and who are allowed to get access to the originals, she now knows that that is still very important, because there's often so much that's still hidden, that's not brought out by the catalog record or by metadata, or even necessarily by the image that you see in a digital gallery. But she was very, very enthusiastic about this, and I was very fortunate, really, to have her. I better stop now. I will take any additional questions.
So I certainly could talk about this into these wonderful people all day and had some moderating questions in mind, but I think that given our time constraints, it's best to just dive right in and take your questions.
First of all, how long was the training period? The fact that you were processing an archive during your training and then had a year to go, how long was that?
The training that I experienced was a semester-long course where we would meet once a week in the Fales collection space to work on the collection. As far as the practicum for the new incoming interns, that has taken place over a process of weeks and is currently ongoing.
And that's separate from the year that you work?
Yes.
Oh, okay. It doesn't take part of that time.
Well, it overlaps.
Okay.
So.
My other question was, I know that NYU's history program has an archival concentration. Was that involved at all?
Is this working? Is this working? No. So NYU is a history and public
Archives and Public History.
Archives and Public History program run by Peter Woosh out of the history department. They actually this year we trained the new group of interns, the one that Jane is working with now. They took his introduction to the archives class. It was great. They got more than this first group did in terms of the theory and readings on the archive. They got far less in terms of practical training. So for us, it was an experiment to see whether we could even use more fully the facilities and in this case the coursework that was already up and running and ongoing at NYU. I think we've all talked about it and we will continue to talk about it. But one thing we found in Jane's year of training was that practical, hands-on training did more in some ways than the full load of reading without the hands-on training. So what we found was, and I think we were all sort of surprised by it in some way that we probably shouldn't have been, but all of a sudden we realized that we hadn't actually trained them yet. And so when they went in January to the Schomburg, one reason why we developed this practicum that Jane really led is because they hadn't had that hands-on training. So, you know, we're still working with what the best way to train students is for this.
Hi. I have a question that to me begs to be asked because it's always wonderful to hear about students, interns especially, doing this kind of work. But I am involved with a networking group for librarians, many who are not library students, although we do have many who are, or recent graduates, but also librarians in transition. And one of the favorite courses of training is in a certificate in archives. And because of the employment situation, many would be happy to do freelance work or projects or temp work. But I'd like to know whether or not you have in the past or considering in the future keeping certain select spots for seasoned librarians who might be very interested, say reference librarians or academic librarians who would be willing to retrain either on their own dime or with it or supported to do this kind of work and collaborate with various institutions in order to continue in their field and in their profession.
Well, the New York Public Library has a staff member in HR who's devoted to bringing interns in. Apparently, the process is that they create, if a division needs interns, they create a job description. It's there in the employment opportunities screen for whoever wants to see it and apply. But this is different. I mean, I have taken interns from Pratt, Queens, etc. in the past. This was a different kind of opportunity because it was about critical mass. It's not one, it's a whole bunch. And that really moves the work forward because even though in some instances when we began, I assigned group interns by groups to a collection. So instead of having 5 collections done, it may be 2 or 3 collections done. it's still the difference between having one person work on a collection. That's one, and that would be all that they would do if they finished it. But yeah, we're open to it.
I would just add that that part of why we designed the project the way we did was because of an expectation of field expertise. Because it's different, you know, having any old person come in and just do anything with any old collection. And that's not to say that a person who didn't have field expertise in Africana studies in some way couldn't do a fabulous job. But part of what we were matching, I think, was the collections and the people. So it wouldn't be just a matter of someone coming in and having no feel for the kind of collection that they were processing in terms of field.
I enjoyed your presentation very much. I head a unit that's had to, for many years, initially out of necessity, rely on graduate students to staff it, and discovered that that was actually a wonderful gift to have that opportunity and the chance to interact, and we're looking to expand that considerably. But one question that comes to my mind immediately, and I'd be curious to know, and you may have said some of this already, in terms of the sustainability. This seems like a very special project, and I'm curious, how is it funded, and do you foresee that funding going forward? Even here where we've had this be a more permanent thing, some of it is based on rather soft money, teaching that's done in a system that we hope continues to be paid for by the schools that are doing it. And I'm just curious whether you see it, particularly because it's also a very specialized program. One can imagine, I look at it in a more global way, one could see there could be wonderful opportunities of this kind for graduate students all across NYU. Do you see the kind of opportunities for continuing funding and support coming out of the institution there?
You know, as I said at the beginning, we've been very fortunate with funding, and the Schomburg made a substantial contribution, and our deans matched it and have, in the past years, matched it again. And again, we've always come in under budget, so every time we think we have a budget for a year, it turns into 2 years because we don't spend it on anything but student salaries. So this is a unique, I mean, I don't know how this works out. And in fact, quite honestly, I don't even know what's in our coffers right now because it's always so much above what I think it's going to be. And part of that is because students do take, you know, time off, and they're allowed to work up to 10 hours, but their day is usually 8 hours. So, you know, we've budgeted in a way that we will always be ahead of where they are, which is a good thing for keeping the project going. We need to think about long-term funding, and part of that is whether it's grants that come out of sources interested in funding the library part, or that are interested in the collaboration part, or are interested in the student part. I think what we're trying to do for the next sort of funding load is fold it into our own library budget. So in other words, fold it into the projects that we imagine developing. And there are all sorts of ways to do that. One of which is to think about the way that the project sort of contributes or might have a digital component to it. In other words, might have the students sort of contributing to a larger NYU probably website in some way. But that's, I mean, that is one of our, I mean, that's, you know, that's the major challenge, is trying to figure out how the funding works. And part of the challenge on that is that my management, my sort of supervision of the Schomburg program is above and beyond my normal course load. So there's never, and I think Diana would probably say the same thing of her role, there's never enough time to pursue this in the way it needs to be pursued. So, you know, if I had a year off to make the Schomburg thing sing, it would be, we would have a web presence, we'd have all sorts of things. Diana and I would go to lunch, you know, we would, we'd start spending some of that money that was budgeted for us as supervisors. But that's the big challenge, is how to make it both such a priority for the university that we actually get the sort of staffing we need, and that will lead to the kinds of ability to, you know, apply for the grants and think longer term instead of just thinking about how, you know, where the next class is going to come from.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.